Welcome to episode 3 of the Tank Me Later podcast. My name is Noah Rubin. I am joined by at Zak the Monster, Zak Hanshew, Roto World / NBC Sports Edge / whatever we are, the king of creative blurbs. Zak, before I even hear from you, I want to start off by listing some examples of some of the ones I just went through earlier and just found a few that you've done. I saw a very popular one. You listed Zach Collins as out with a paper cut when he had a finger injury, and then added that he probably cut it on their comically long injury report. And then you have Thregan Murray, the classic, also just adding in that they're injured because of Victor Wembanyama. As we know, every tanking team, if they have a slight boo-boo, you're out 10 games because we need Wemby. And then we have the right call because Delon was starting over Monte Morris. And then shout out to all my Franz because Franz Wagner was playing. Zach, where do you come up with some of this stuff?
I'll tell you what, man, these are just nothing but terrible dad jokes and bad puns that I don't know, man. I try not to take myself too seriously when writing these up. And so hopefully, I appreciate you shouting those out. Hopefully they give people a little bit of a chuckle. They usually give me a little bit of a chuckle when I'm writing them. So, yeah, appreciate it, man.
Well, look, if it's just me and you chuckling, it's just me and you chuckling, but it's definitely at least two people. I love
That's
it every
right.
single time. Zach, you're working with NBC / Roto World now. I know we've talked probably a couple times about how you got into fantasy sports and writing about it, but if you can just kind of tell our new viewers about how you got into creating basketball content.
Yeah, man, I'll go quick with this. I've been writing fantasy content for about 5 years now, almost exactly 5 years ago. I was playing fantasy football. That was my big thing back then. And I was doing a podcast with a buddy of mine that we were just sharing with league mates. I actually ripped the idea off from fantasy footballers, which is how they got their start. So we were just talking shit on everybody else in the league and just kind of going through that sort of thing, giving weekly recaps of matchups. And I thought, I'll start, putting some blurbs out and start, writing some actual content. I applied for a gig at Fantasy Pros and got rejected. Started my own website, just a real basic WordPress thing where we were pumping out some goofy articles a couple times a week. Reapplied over the summer and got hired on with them and went on to do, over 500 football articles and basketball articles with them over the next 9 years. Got into editing with them. And I started doing some blurbs over at Roto Wire for NBA, which was my first taste of NBA action. And eventually just figured out that I liked basketball a little bit more. And the rest is history. I ended up applying at NBC Sports Edge, like you said, whatever you want to call this website that we're working for right now. Back in, I guess that was 2021, right? Coming up on a year and a half now.
Yeah.
I think you and I started right about at the same time. And put in the application just on a whim and ended up interviewing with Ryan and Dr. A. And been with them ever since.
Yeah. Well, quite a ride. I think it's something that definitely a lot of people that if they're interested in getting into writing about fantasy sports, something they can replicate. Just got to kind of take a step, put yourself out there a little bit and just keep trying. Like you said, you didn't get the first one with Fantasy Pros, but you were able to, pump out content on your own. And now you're where you are, which is a pretty cool gig. And it's a busy gig, obviously, but we just ended the regular season where we had 15 games on Sunday. I think by the time this comes out, it'll be a few weeks after that. So we'll probably have some play-in updates. Probably first round playoffs will be going on. But we're just going to talk about how the regular season ended because we're not going to talk about any teams that are in the postseason. We're going to talk about some teams whose seasons are already over. And we'll start with a fun one, the Orlando Magic, who have – I was counting earlier, I believe 8 lottery picks currently on their roster. And I guess maybe even more if you include like Michael Carter Williams. he may have been a lottery pick. But if we're talking about fairly recent lottery picks, I think it's 8 of them. Markelle Fultz, Wendell Carter Jr., Franz Wagner, Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, Jonathan Isaac, Paolo Banchero, who's probably going to win Rookie of the Year. A couple other guys like Gary Harris, Bol, who's kind of buried on the bench, Mo Wagner. Yeah, that's kind of the rundown of Orlando's roster. We'll start with Banchero, Zach. He's the guy that finished, I believe, outside the top 200 in 9-cat value as a rookie, but I think everybody kind of knows he's much better than that. Just kind of some rookie issues that he had to work through as far as efficiency. But where do you see the next few years going for him?
Yeah, I mean, so Banchero did finish outside the top 200. It wasn't a phenomenal fantasy. It was a great just from an NBA perspective. He is the Rookie of the Year. Although I don't think it's a runaway between him and Jalen Williams. He's the favorite for good reason. Average 20 points a game. But from a fantasy perspective, man. If you punted field goal percentage and turnovers, he was right outside the top 100. So there's obviously an avenue for him to improve. And the free throw percentage was garbage as well. That can certainly improve. Those are rookie warts that I think everybody can expect. Slight improvements on the defensive end as far as racking up defensive stats. And he can easily jump into the top 75. So there's a ton of didn't live up to his ADP this year, but absolutely the ceiling is phenomenal.
Yeah, he's definitely a guy to build around. It really seems after we went first overall last year that unless they just absolutely luck out again and select first overall again, that he's going to kind of be the face of the franchise along with their other however many lottery picks they're going to end up having. Because I believe they'll also have Chicago's, unless Chicago lucks out and gets into the top 4. So we're looking at 2 more lottery picks adding to this already crowded roster. Certainly a team that can make some sort of trade, but we won't speculate too much on that yet. Let's talk about Franz Wagner. Shout out to all my Franz. Finished just outside the top 100 for the second year in a row after doing so as a rookie. He's a guy I really like. I like him as a talent, efficient player, can get to the basket well, just kind of does a lot all around, but maybe isn't necessarily as aggressive all the time as a guy like Banchero is. Do you see, playing alongside Banchero, him still, eventually getting inside the top 100 or even top 75?
Yeah, he can. I mean, look, he can certainly get inside the top 100. I mean, as you mentioned, he was just outside that mark. He does do just a little bit of everything, almost 19 as a scorer. 1 steal a game, doesn't wow you with the rebounds, with the assists, but the numbers are solid. He's an efficient shooter, which is something that for fantasy folks, that's always something that is highly prized. So yeah, he could continue to be great. And it's not something that is super concerning to me that he's going to have Banchero. They're going to have, as you mentioned, 2 more lottery picks this year. They're going to have probably a top 6 or 7 pick, almost guaranteed. They're going to get somebody like an Anthony Black, one of the Thompson twins, somebody like that. And then they'll pick somewhere towards the back end of the lottery and end up with somebody else really good there. But he's cemented himself as somebody on this team that is going to be in the starting lineup, for the foreseeable future. We've seen him play point Franz. He can get teammates involved when he needs to. He can take over a game as a scorer when he needs to. As you mentioned, not necessarily the most aggressive, but he has shown flashes of that. Another guy whose ceiling is very high. I don't think his ceiling is quite as high as Banchero's, but top 100 is I think that's being very conservative with, his ceiling.
Definitely. Pretty much a no-brainer that he's going to get inside the top 100 very quickly. It's just how much higher can he go? We'll talk about the only guy that finished inside the top 109 cat leagues this past season, Markelle Fultz, who has been known as an injury-prone player, but after he missed the first month or so of the season, he didn't miss a game until he got a rest day with like 2 games left, which really surprised me that he was able to go that long, not really missing back-to-backs, just being able to play, which is really cool to see from him. He's limited with his shooting from distance, but he's still a very solid contributor. Zach, do you think if he sticks around as the point guard of the future, that he's a guy that can continue to stay inside the top 100 and maybe even higher up?
Absolutely, man. I mean, we've seen from Fultz. I think Fultz gets a bad rap as a bust just because of the Jason Tatum situation that Boston traded back, and obviously he could be viewed as a bust because he's missed so many games. But when he's been on the court, I mean, it's been pretty impressive. He's a guy that he's a good rebounder for a guard. Obviously, he's great at getting teammates involved. He's a reliable scorer, and he can rack up steals with the best of them, which, again, in fantasy, when you can get those defensive numbers, again, that's something that's very highly valuable. So the biggest question mark for him is going to continue to be health. But, if we see what we saw from him this year and he starts the season off, fully healthy, I think he could be phenomenal. He could certainly be a top 75 guy.
Yeah, I think the only way that he isn't is if Orlando gets the number 2 pick in the draft and takes Scoot Henderson. Probably the only way they don't, which would be just terrible luck for Fultz. Or if they decide to make some sort of consolidation trade, bring in a start point guard. We'll see. It's probably too early for those trade rumors, though Bleacher Report and everybody else has no hesitancy if any sort of rumor flies off. I don't know if you saw, I think today, I know this will come a few weeks after, but Trae Young, there was a report that the Hawks front office has the blessing from ownership to kind of do what they want with the roster. And after being kind of taken a few times by different sources, that turned into, so they're going to trade Trae Young. So is it going to happen? No, but there's certainly quite a few point guards that can move on. This is all speculation, of course, but if it happens, it happens. But Fultz definitely, whether it's in Orlando, potentially somewhere else, has a bright future finally after 5 or 6 years of trials and tribulations. But let's talk about a really fun one. A guy who, let's see how many games he played this season. 11. Jonathan Isaac, who played basketball this year, which was really cool. I think there was a report that says he will be ready for training camp in the start of the season. I don't even want to say I believe it. I just, after everything he's kind of been through, I really hope for his sake that he can just play basketball. Zach, do you believe that he will play basketball coming up in the next few seasons?
I mean, yeah, I believe he'll play basketball. It's just a matter of how much he's going to play. I mean, we got 2 years off, and he came back for, as you said, 11 games. And what was the average? 10 and a half minutes or something silly like that?
11.3.
11.3. Okay. So 11 point. So, I mean, the guy played less than 150 total minutes after 2 years off, and then he got re-injured at the end of the year. So not highly encouraging for a fantasy perspective, especially if you've held on to him in Dynasty. I am curious to see this year, though, now that the incentives in his contract kick in and it's not $17 million guaranteed, maybe we see some urgency with him. I don't know. Or maybe it really is the fact that he is just dealing with something ridiculously serious of an injury, and we just never see him come back to full strength like we saw him before.
Yeah, it definitely has all the talent in the world. These injuries have just plagued him. And it's to the point where it's funny almost, like it's basically a joke. Like, oh, is Jonathan Isaac going to play? Oh my gosh, he's injured again. But I also feel just so bad for him because it's obviously, he's been going through all these injuries. You plan your whole life just preparing to get to the NBA, and now it's all derailed like this. So hopefully he's able to come back and play. Because, I mean, we've seen a couple guys recently, like John Wall as well, that just years taken off their career from injuries. Lonzo Ball, who knows when he's going to come back. So just kind of unfortunate to see. But, yeah, Orlando definitely has all the talent to have a bright future. I don't remember their exact record off the top of my head, but I think after Markelle Fultz came back, they were over 500. So I think if they didn't get off to kind of a slow start, they could have been competing for a play-in game. I'd be pretty shocked if next season they weren't competing for the play-in, especially with some of the teams that have been in the postseason recently kind of falling off a little bit. Who knows what's going on with Chicago, Toronto? So like I'll throw it out there. Even Atlanta, who knows? I I
Yeah.
like I like to say that we're good, but as a fan, I'll try and be unbiased and say who knows what's going to happen. So we will. Let's see. Let's move. Let's stay in the East. Let's stay in the Southeast as well. So let's talk about Washington and the Wizards, who it probably seemed like they were gunning for the play-in or some postseason basketball. Didn't really work out. Probably could have made a push to barely make the play-in, but ended up kind of pulling the plug. Led by Kristaps Porzingis, Bradley Beal, Kyle Kuzma, a couple other solid guys like Daniel Gafford, DeLon Wright, Monte Morris, Denny Avdia, Corey Kispert, and then first-round pick Johnny Davis, who spent the majority of the season in the G League before finally getting some playing time late, and he actually did pretty well. So I know Washington force-fed him minutes and force-fed him the ball as much as possible, but Zach, it really seemed like he was going to end up being a bust because people were confused. Like, why can't he even get on the court? He just picked him 10 overall. But he showed a little bit down the stretch. Obviously, some inefficient rookie issues. But do you see him as a guy that can be part of Washington's future if they stick with this core? I think if they blow it up and rebuild, that obviously he'll see minutes like he did down the stretch. But if they kind of try and run it back season, is he a guy that can be part of their rotation?
I think they should certainly give him a look. I mean, Washington is constantly in, and this is the team that is, quote unquote, my hometown team. I'm, about 70 miles from DC, so I actively root for Washington, and they have just been in this no man's land bubble of like the 6 to 10 seed every single year. They don't seem like they're ever, pushing over the hump, and sometimes they're really terrible. So yeah, they need to mix things up here. I think if they keep with this current core, I'm not necessarily sure that Davis sees a ton of run next year, especially with Bradley Beal just commanding all of those guard minutes and all that usage. And as you mentioned, they also have some guys that are pretty good in the backcourt as well. They have DeLon Wright. They have Jordan Goodwin. I'm not a big fan of Monte Morris, but he's there, and they're committed to giving him minutes. So no, I don't see it. I mean, but the final 5 games of the season, 17 points, 6 assists, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.5 steals, almost a block, and 2 triples. So Johnny Davis, he showed some good flashes at the end of the year, and he was one of my favorite scorers coming out of college. I mean, obviously, from a fantasy perspective, you want to see a little bit more than just the scoring. But from an NBA perspective, this is a guy that can go out and consistently give you 15 points a night, and Washington could certainly use somebody like that coming off the bench with consistent rotation minutes. I'm not sure that he gets them, but I think they should certainly mix things up and give it to him.
Yeah, I definitely see that kind of electric scorer roll off the bench being possible next season. But does that result in him getting 20 minutes a game when you have Bradley Beal, Kyle Kuzma, and Kristaps Porzingis taking the majority of the shots? I mean, health hasn't exactly been on their side over the past couple seasons. I think Bradley Beal played 50 games this season. Kristaps was able to play 65, which is great for him, and Kuz playing 64, which isn't bad. But let's talk about Bradley Beal, I guess. So 2 seasons ago and 3 seasons ago, averaging 30 a game, and the past 2 seasons really tailed off. He averaged 23.2 for actually the second straight season. He's not scoring at the level he was before. It kind of seemed like maybe he was trying to play team basketball and play winning basketball, but it's actually resulted in them going to the lottery twice in a row. So do you see Beal potentially bouncing back next season after 2 straight seasons averaging 23 after averaging 31?
I don't know. I don't see it. If they keep this same, I mean, we'll have to just kind of stick with that caveat. If they keep this same lineup, no, because Porzingis is going to get his, Kuz is going to get his. I thought, they didn't make the playoffs, but I thought Beal actually was a little bit better this year. It was kind of nice to see him. He shot better than 50% this year. He was very efficient. It was the first time in his career, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
As you mentioned, just 23 points. But if you have 23 points from him, 20 from Kuz, 20 from KP, and then solid contributions from guys like Kispert, guys like DeLon Wright, guys like Avdia, Gafford, that's a team that can compete at least for a play-in spot in the East. So I don't necessarily know that we're ever going to see him get back to second-round value Bradley Beal. I don't know that that's part of what the team wants him to do at this point anymore. He doesn't need to carry this team with scoring 32 points a game. So no, I mean, he finished as a fifth rounder this year, 55 overall. I think his ADP will fall next year, and I think you can get him for closer to value, and he won't end up being a bust. But do I see him ever getting back to 30 point a game Beal? I doubt it.
Yeah. It's interesting because with Washington, they have a lot of pieces that, like you said, on paper, they should be a playoff team. They have arguably like top 15, at least top 10 scorer in the league. Like in Beal, I think at his peak, he hasn't shown it the past 2 seasons, but I think he's capable of, we saw him average 30 twice in a row, so he's still capable of it.
Mm-hmm.
Kristaps Porzingis is a dynamic center that, pretty much when he's healthy, very hard to guard, good shot blocker. Kyle Kuzma's a great third option as a scorer on offense. Then other pieces like DeLon Wright, who I think we would agree is an excellent perimeter defender, really good at coming away with steals. Corey Kispert showed down the stretch just how good of a shooter he is. I think he hit 9 threes in one game. Diaz, solid. They have a couple lottery guys that I think didn't pan out as well as they maybe wanted them to. But it's a team that should be in the playoffs. So it's interesting. I guess we can talk about this real quick before we talk about maybe a couple more players. If you were in charge and you were the GM of Washington, how quickly are you blowing things up? Or are you trying to run it back one more year and just kind of see?
At this point, I'm blowing it up right now. I really think, KP and Kuz they have player options for this coming summer. Both of those guys want to get paid. Especially Kuzma. I think Kuzma's gone personally. I'm not sure that Washington pays him. If it was me running the team, I'd blow things up right away. I mean, you got ideally the best season you could get from Kristaps Porzingis as far as his health and as far as his production. You saw Kuzma with one of the best seasons of his career. And as you mentioned, you saw all these role players really just kind of come into their own and play great basketball, and you still fell short. So I don't think there's any value in continuing to run something back that you could just say, hey, this might work. We might be able to make it. Unless you really feel confident and really feel sure about something, which I can't imagine they do, then I'd be blowing this thing up right now.
Yeah. And you mentioned with Kristaps, his health. As a rookie, he played 72 games. Second season, he played 66. And then he hadn't played 60 up until this season. So he played 65 games, came really close. He could have played 70. I think they kind of pulled the plug a little bit, didn't want to risk him getting hurt, wanted to help their lottery odds, the classic last month of the season. That's so fun for fantasy. But do you see him potentially, whether it's with Washington or a different team, getting back to that 65 game mark or at least 60 games? Or do you think that that's something that's kind of like a fluke for him at this point?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a fluke. I feel like those are such hard things to predict, but no, I feel like he can get back to the 60 game mark again. And for fantasy, I feel like he's always somebody that's going to be high risk and high reward because his injury risk is going to be baked into where you are able to draft him. But this season, he finished inside the top 20, which is something that he always finishes. On a per game, not always, but almost always on a per game basis, because he really is that unicorn. He can block shots. He can hit threes. He was awesome from 3-point range this year. He can score. He can rebound. He can do just about everything. And so you're always just kind of, crossing your fingers that he doesn't sit out for an extended number of games.
Yeah. I think, yeah, like you said, something that is definitely very, very difficult to predict. I think we're pretty much on the same page about that they should blow this up. If they blow it up, that would probably include, if they do it right, trading away Beal, Kristaps, and Kyle Kuzma. I think Kuz is a guy that is a really good scorer, but he doesn't really contribute anything defensively, statistically. And I guess the efficiency is not really there. 3 turnovers per game, 45% from the field, 73% from the line this past season. That kind of limits him in category leagues. But if they were to move some of those guys away, that could allow minutes for Kispert, Avdia. I know we've talked about Johnny Davis, and then whoever they get in the lottery. Hypothetically, I know the old podcast was hypothetically speaking, but we'll do hypothetically speaking here. They trade away Beal, they trade away Kristaps, they trade away Kuzma. How good do you think a guy like Corey Kispert could be as the starting shooting guard?
Yeah, I mean, I think he could be. Are we talking top 100? I think top 100 certainly is within his range of outcome. I would be curious to see. I think one is dependent on who's left on the roster, because if they trade those guys away, are they going just for picks? Are they going for consolidation and trying to bring back some other players that are at least competent? But I have to imagine if they trade those guys, it's mostly going to be for picks, and they're going to go into that rebuild. So if Kispert is the starter and there's not too many guys around him, yeah, we saw what he could do here at the end of the year, and he's a lights-out three-point shooter, and he proved that he can do a little bit more in the box score than just score and just shoot threes. So, yeah, top 100, certainly within his range of outcomes, and maybe with the potential for just a little bit more.
Yeah, so – kind of with I think our shared opinion of Washington should blow this up. Will they? I don't know. But if you're playing in a dynasty league, what are you doing with your Wizards players? Are you just kind of wait and see mode? Are you saying, I could kind of want to get these guys off my roster? Or are you saying, ooh, like I'm going to go try and get them for good value before they can maybe see more minutes?
Yeah, I think with Kuz and maybe not with Kuz. I think certainly for Porzingis, he's a guy that if I can sell high and get a lot of value from, I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Because let's say he ends up going to a team that I mean, hell, this is totally never going to happen. But let's say he goes to a team like the Lakers. I mean, obviously his value goes way down. Let's say he goes, back to Dallas. Let's say he goes, to a team where he's not going to be utilized as much as he is as the number one guy in Washington. Then his value goes down. Right now, it's an unknown where he's playing next season, so his value is what it is. I don't think it can go higher than what it is right now. I think it can certainly go lower. So for him, somebody that I would be trading. For Kuz, it's a wait and see for me. I think he can go to a better situation. I think if he's on a team that is even worse than Washington, he could certainly take on even more of a load on offense and get better. So I think his ceiling is a little bit higher. And then I think for Washington's role players like a Kispert, like an Avdia, like a Johnny Davis, like a DeLon Wright, I think those are guys that if you can get them on the cheap, I think I would certainly be trying to do so. And just something, this has nothing to do with, redraft necessarily. I think it comes into play a little bit for Dynasty. But did you know Kuz and Porzingis, they're only a week apart in age, both born in the summer of 95. I could have sworn Porzingis was
so
much
wild.
older. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, because Kuz came out later, obviously, because he spent a couple of years in college. But I would have thought Kuz was older than Porzingis. But that's interesting.
Okay.
I think when somebody comes out of college and they're not 19 years old, in my mind, they come into the league as like 30. And they're just like, they're basically on their way out when they get drafted. So I need to fix that because you miss out on guys like Jalen Williams if you do that. But because I think he's 21, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like, in my mind, that's a red flag going off. I need them to be 18 and a half years old when they get on my dynasty roster. But
Sure.
We will move to a third and final team for this episode with the Utah Jazz. Zach, coming into this season, I think it would have been pretty difficult to find somebody predicting that they would get more than 25 wins, maybe 30. But they ended up with 37. We're in the middle of the playoff race. Then we're in the middle of the play-in race. And if we're being honest, they probably could have ended up making the play-in tournament if they tried. But I don't think that was – it's an interesting situation. I think everybody probably thought that they would be picking the top five, have top five lottery odds at the end of the season. They finished out strong, quote unquote strong, as far as losing a bunch of games and helping their odds, and they'll go in with the 9th best lottery odds after a 37-45 season. They have Lauri Markkanen, they have Jordan Clarkson, they have Talen Horton-Tucker, Walker Kessler. I think you call him Walker Kessler Ranger, or how do you use your name pun for that?
I don't know. Sometimes Blocker Kessler, sometimes just the Ranger.
Just the Ranger. That's great. We had Kelly Olynyk. We have Colin Sexton, Ochai Agbaji. I hope I didn't butcher that. And then we have the Chris Dunn resurgence, and then another lottery pick, as well as 2 other first-round picks. Zach, Utah is an interesting team. They're probably not going to add the talent that a lot of people probably thought they would. Where do you kind of see, like, how long is this rebuild going to last for Utah now that they're not adding necessarily a top 5 pick? Still could with the chance. I mean, the 20.3% chance to hop into the top 4, 4.5% chance to get the top pick. Do you see Utah just kind of remaining competitive? Did they blow it all up to get a bunch of picks to just be in the middle of the pack for a little bit? Where do you think they kind of go after this season?
Yeah, I think we'll see a major move from them this offseason. I think Danny Ainge is he's so brilliant, right? I mean, we saw him, the Rudy Gobert. I know this is coming out in 3 weeks after recording, but I mean, punch and slow-mo in a game last night. They were noticeably better this season if you look at the numbers when Gobert was off the court as opposed to when he was on the court. And Utah absolutely fleeced Minnesota in that deal. And Walker Kessler just looks like he was fantasy's #1 rookie this year on a per-game basis. But just in real life, I mean, just an imposing force, a guy that did a lot of the same things really well that Gobert did: patrol the paint, rebound, block shots, disrupt opponents coming into the paint. So they are just so well run right now with Ainge at the helm. I don't think he's a type of guy that sits and waits around for too much to happen, and especially not if they're going to be sitting in the middle of the pack like they were here. I mean, honestly, Utah did everything right this year except for lose more games. So I absolutely think we're going to see a big-time move from them. They have a treasure trove of picks. They can bring in another star, maybe 2. They have cap space. This team, the future looks so bright for them. As you mentioned, Walker Kessler, Lauri Markkanen just having an incredible season that I don't think anybody saw coming. I think we all expected him to take a step forward, but nothing to this degree. And we still have Colin Sexton, who was reined in for the most part this year, behind a Mike Conley, with Jordan Clarkson kind of taking center stage and with dealing with multiple injuries. But I think if they can unleash Colin Sexton as well, they can get a lot out of him moving forward too.
And just to recap that trade, because I saw it again earlier today, 3 unprotected firsts in 2023, 25, and 27, a top 5 protected in 2029, Malik Beasley, Patrick Beverley, Walker Kessler, Jared Vanderbilt, and Leandro Bolmero. I hope that's pronounced correctly, but obviously they swung most of those players, just held on to Kessler, who is, I don't know if he's been as good as Pete Gobert, but he's been really freaking good as a rookie at center. So they have a nice big man duo already that's you could argue that could be the core for the next 5 at least years. They have what seems to be a good head coach in Will Hardy, good culture, good system, a team that's competing, knowing kind of that they were written off from the beginning. So I think it's a good organization that's set up to actually, make a run at some point if they can acquire the talent. Uh, how that happens, when that happens, I would trust in Danny Ainge. But uh, for the next few seasons, obviously they're going to add another lottery pick. But if we look at Markkanen, was this a fluke season? He just finished in the top 20 in 9-cat leagues, started as an all-star. He played 66 games, but honestly kind of got shut down the stretch. If they were interested in competing, he probably would have played even more games, which is there's not many guys that are finishing that high that are playing that many games. There's only a handful. I think Jason Tatum, Domantas Sabonis, Vucevic, there may be like one other guy because I was looking earlier at guys that played, 75 plus games. Tatum may have been 74. But anyways, that amount of games, hard to replicate. Is that something that Markkanen is going to continue to do for a few seasons, or do you think this is kind of an opportunity to sell high?
No, I don't think we've seen the best of Markkanen yet. I don't think this is a fluke season. He's still a very young guy. We saw how well he could play. We saw flashes of this in Chicago. Obviously, nowhere near this level, but we saw what he could do in Chicago. We saw certainly what he could do in Cleveland when he pivoted to the small forward role and played that jumbo big lineup alongside Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. And he really played well in that role also. So this year you see increase in minutes and with increase in usage, still had a very efficient season. He took a step forward in terms of field goal percentage, took a step forward as a three-point shooter, 3 triples a game. Rebounds went through the roof. Obviously he's not big on the steals and blocks. He's not a guy that's going to get you a ton of either. But as far as scoring, threes, rebounds, and efficient shooting, and the guy's great from the free throw line too, which is something you don't necessarily get from a big all the time. So no, I don't think we've seen the best of him yet. I think this was his first season as a team's true number one option. And if Utah if the roster looks similar to this next year, as I mentioned, I think they probably will make a deal. But if he is the number one scoring option next year, I expect him to be even better.
Yeah, definitely a very fantasy-friendly game. Not a guy that they're probably going to be looking to move. They're wanting to hold on to him for a while, I'd imagine, and kind of build with him or around him. We'll see. But the other guy that, Walker Kessler, the Ranger, whatever you want to call him, a guy that over the final 2 months of the season provided second-round value. He doesn't hit threes. He doesn't get assists. He doesn't get steals. He doesn't make free throws. But he averaged over the final 2 months 12.1 points, 10.8 rebounds, and 3 blocks while shooting 73.5% from the field. He's arguably, a better long-term dynasty prospect than Markkanen. He might be the best on the team just for the shot blocking upside because – and we've talked about this all season, there's only a handful of true shot blockers in the NBA. There's Jaren Jackson Jr., there's Robert Williams when he's healthy. Some of the guys like Anthony Davis, Joel Embiid, Bam Adebayo. There's like a handful, but there's only a handful. And Kessler, as a rookie, proved that he can be among the best. Hypothetically, you're doing a dynasty startup draft right now, 12 teams. What round are you taking him in?
I think part of this depends on your build, but if we're just looking at pure talent, age, fantasy value in a vacuum, I don't think he gets outside of the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say, around third round, just because I feel when you're doing a draft, you want to get some young, fun stars that score a lot of points. Maybe he doesn't necessarily do that, but I think first 3 rounds, if he's going outside of that, that's probably way too late, especially with, the stats that he kind of dominates and that he's going to be able to do for a long time. I mean, he did that as a rookie. There's not many rookies that are blocking 3 shots and shooting 73.5% from the field over the final 2 months. So definitely an incredibly intriguing, valuable dynasty asset at this point. You mentioned Colin Sexton. is he a guy that, you know, barring them probably picking either Scoot Henderson at 2, or if they end up taking like a Cason Wallace, Nick Smith, maybe. There's not, I guess, a ton of point guards, outside of Scoot. Assuming Sexton is kind of a starter for at least the next season, who knows what happens a couple seasons down the road, but next season, is Colin Sexton a guy that can kind of pop the way a lot of people predicted heading into the season? I know I had him pretty high on my rankings because I was looking earlier today. A lot higher than he ended up finishing, because he was, he was 240 according to Basketball Monster this past season in 48 games. So is he a guy that you can see, I don't know, approach, let's say top 150? We'll be generous because it feels like he scores, and that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, can he get to top 150? I don't think that's too lofty of a goal. I had him very high this year as well, and obviously complete bust for fantasy purposes. But if we could see another year of him, and the team actually makes a commitment to getting him minutes, as opposed to some veterans, like I mentioned, Mike Conley, Jordan Clarkson, if we can see a little bit more emphasis on getting him some minutes, if he could stay healthy for the entire season, I absolutely think he can get to top 150. And I certainly think top 100 is, it's within his range of outcomes. Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler are going to be top, 50 guys for years to come.
Yeah.
And Markkanen is a great scorer. Kessler, that's not his game necessarily. So who's going to be that second or third option? We've seen Sexton average 24 points a game in Cleveland. So it's not going to be crazy to see him get back up to 20 points per game if they kind of unleash him next season. So yeah, I think top, let's call it top 125. We'll split the difference and call it that for next season. And I absolutely think he's going to come at a discount in fantasy drafts after he burns so many people, and myself included. And I think he'll end up being a pretty sneaky late round flyer in drafts.
Yeah, I don't remember how many drafts I ended up getting him in, just because it felt like he went a little bit too high for me. But when we did our 8-cat rankings for the draft guide, I had him at 72. So I think that may have ended up being a little high. I know there's a lot of people high on him, but yeah, honestly, looking back at all of those rankings, I'm looking forward to some redemption next season with the rankings, because those were god awful. Very, very, very awful. But Sexton, I don't think will be anywhere near 72 probably ever. So take that for what it is. That was definitely way too high. And of course, the caveat with literally everything we just said is unless Wemby, because if any of these teams ends up getting the number 1 overall pick, gets Wembanyama, that changes the entire dynamic of everything on the team. If the Jazz get him, the overload at forward, I mean, who knows? Maybe they go Markkanen back at the 3, Wemby at the 4, Walker Kessler at the 5. That would be a remade version of the Cleveland front court that they did with Markkanen at the 3. That would be incredibly intriguing and very, very scary to play against. If you look at Orlando, they already have, they traded away Bamba, but they still have Wendell Carter, Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner. What do? Do they trade Wendell? Probably. That's probably the way to go. And then Washington, I don't know. They'd probably trade Kristaps at that point, or maybe they have a Twin Towers. It seems like everybody's gonna have a Twin Towers if they win the lottery and get Wembanyama. Zach, one last basketball question. Since I talk about Wembanyama, and it probably depends a little bit on the situation. Like, there's probably a difference between him being drafted to Houston or versus San Antonio versus the Thunder as far as his fantasy impact. But just kind of generally speaking, you're drafting the player, it doesn't really matter what team. You're doing a dynasty startup draft. How many guys would you actually take above him, having never seen him play an NBA game?
Ooh, probably. Oh man, probably Jokic. Maybe I would consider Luca. Maybe I would consider Giannis, but probably just Joker. And then it's going to go to Vic after that. I cannot see me going past one or two players for him.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a handful of guys that you can make an argument for. You can probably make an argument for like a Luka or like a LaMelo, a Jokic, a Giannis. But I don't know, man. You're getting a guy who's 19 that is 7'4" or whatever, shoots threes, blocks shot, does. I mean, every highlight is practically a joke. I laugh half the time I watch his highlights because it's just so ridiculous, so fun to watch. But yeah, it's hard to picture many guys that you would take over, especially just for the amount of upside. But before we call it an episode, Zach, for anybody who's interested in getting into creating content for general fantasy or fantasy basketball or dynasty or whatever, what would your advice be to somebody that's kind of interested in getting started there?
Yeah, just keep writing. I mean, as I mentioned before, I got rejected at Fantasy Pros. I went out and did some goofy stuff with my friends, and I did it because I liked it. I was putting stuff out on, rinky-dink WordPress site that I got for free. I got it was a WordPress dot whatever we called it at that time, and just putting out stuff that I liked. I was still doing the bad puns. I was still doing the having fun with the analysis. And don't be afraid to go out and do this stuff just because you love it. When I started at Fantasy Pros, I was getting paid nothing to put articles out. I did it because I loved it. I did it because I wanted to continue to grow. And the more you write, the more you ask for opportunities, the more you take on new opportunities, the better you'll get. And never be afraid to take on something that you think, oh man, maybe this is going to be silly. Maybe this is not something that's for me. Give it a shot. And, I started doing football and ended up, I do nothing but basketball now because I like basketball a lot more. So never be afraid to stretch out and try some new things when it comes to content creation.
Yeah, you mentioned, putting yourself out there, being yourself. It really seems like within your writing, like you're including your puns and your dad jokes, but it's kind of your style, and I think it's pretty enjoyable that way. And as far as reaching out, I know you're I think you're very good about responding to people when they tweet at you. Even when they tweet not so friendly things, you at least give them some interactions, because I know you've had your fair share of people share their opinion that isn't very friendly. But definitely just putting yourself out there, keeping the work. I think it's something that it's fun to see. It's fun to see new people, new faces. But Zach, I know we talked about you write for RotoWorld / NBC Sports Edge / whatever we are. Do you have anything exciting coming up with your content creation, whether it's for NBC or on your own? And I guess where can we kind of find that work? I know you do a few other betting websites. So is there anything you got going on with that?
Yeah, man. Nothing crazy exciting right now. Things are kind of dying down with the playoffs starting. We are doing some end of season roundtable stuff, me, you, and Raph, which is going to be a lot of fun. Just sent in some stuff earlier. And then obviously we'll be getting into the off season, which is really when things take off and become a lot of fun. For right now, yeah, I'm doing betting articles at Sportsbook Review. And I just started doing some articles for Mojo, which is a new stock market type of fantasy platform, which is pretty cool. So yeah, got a couple of those things in the pipe right now, and just really excited for this off season, man. I think this is going to be quite a bit of fun for the NBC crew.
Yeah, going to be a fun off season. Going to be fun to breathe a little bit after a very hectic, busy season. But definitely looking forward to seeing what else you have putting out. And also, obviously, draft guide's gonna be around the corner too. So I'm sure that'll be fun as well. But Zach, the Blurb King, Blurb legend himself. You guys you can find him at Zach the Monster on Twitter. Feel free to hit him up about any fantasy related questions. He will give you his opinion. I think it's a pretty good opinion, especially with fantasy basketball, fantasy football. If you ask him fantasy baseball questions, he'll give you his opinion, but I can't guarantee that it's going to be right. But Zach,
It'd be terrible.
thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for the kind words, brother, and thanks so much for having me on, man. It's always my pleasure.
Yes, sir. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Tank Me Later podcast.